Narborough is a very safe village in Leicestershire, England. It is known for one crime only. It took place in 1983. 15-year-old Lynda Mann lived in Narborough. She attended a grammar school and community college. She was the younger sister of Susan Mann, who was 2 years older. Their mother, Kathleen Mann, moved to Narborough after a divorce. Kathleen married again to Edward Eastwood in 1980 when Susan was 14 and Lynda was 12. Lynda was described as a lovely, quiet teenager. Lynda liked school and enjoyed being out with her friends. As an adventurous girl, she liked everything about growing up, especially makeup and clothes. If money for clothes was a bit short, Lynda would babysit to earn extra money to get materials and make her own dresses. On November 21st, 1983, Lynda walked to a friend's house, but she vanished before she got there. She promised her mother that she would be home by 10 p.m., but by midnight, Lynda was still not home. Her frantic parents called the authorities. They searched everywhere, but with no luck. A hospital porter discovered her body at 7:20 a.m. as he was on his way to work. He initially thought it was a mannequin. Lynda had been savagely assaulted, and she was strangled. Her jeans were removed, and the rest of her clothes were untidily scattered. She had a scarf around her neck used to strangle her. When the residents of Narborough heard about the crime, they were shocked and new security measures started to take place. Young girls were advised to walk in groups and never wander alone. Investigators searched the immediate area around Lynda's body, but were not able to find anything that could help at the time. Only a few 100 yards away from the crime scene, there was a local psychiatric hospital. Some people believed that the perpetrator could be a patient there, and that added extra load on everyone, especially the parents of the young girls who live in Narborough. During Lynda's autopsy, a male DNA was collected from her body. The individual had type A blood. This meant 1 in about 10% of the adult male population in England could be the killer. Edward's blood was taken, and it was found he was not type A. A group of investigators walked from house to house, trying to find any new information. Others made a list of all offenders of similar crimes in Leicestershire and went about questioning them all. Investigators received a tip about a spiky-haired young man. The person on the phone claimed to have seen him at 8 p.m., 2 minutes away from where Lynda's body was found. Unfortunately, he was never identified for 3 long years. In 1986, tragedy struck again. 15-year-old Don Ashworth lived in Enderby, Leicestershire, with her parents and her brother Andrew. She had a part-time job working at the newsagent in Enderby. On July 31st, 1986, Don left work at 4 p.m. and headed to her friend's house in Narborough. She was told to be home by 7 p.m. Don was last seen at 4:40 p.m. by passing motorists passing King Edward Avenue. By 7:30 p.m. With no sign of her, Don's parents got worried. They drove through Narborough, and they couldn't find her. At 9:40 p.m., they called the police. They could not help but think of Lynda's man and hope their daughter was safe. A few days later, police officers searching for Dawn found her body in a field. She had been also assaulted and strangled. A male DNA collected from Dawn's body revealed the attacker had the blood type A. This was not the only similarity. Both crimes took place on footpaths. Both girls were teenagers, and both walking alone. They were both found in similar circumstances, having suffered the same fate. Lynda and Don both attended Lutterworth Grammar School and Community College. The police parked a mobile incident room to take information from villagers and passers-by. The police took about 200 telephone calls, and dozens of people visited the mobile unit. The most promising new lead concerned a motorcycle that had been parked under the motorway bridge. There were several reports of a young man in a red crash helmet observed in the vicinity sometime around 5 p.m. On the day of the crime, on August 1st, the day after Dawn was reported missing, but a day before, her body was found. A policewoman and a detective saw a youth on a red motorcycle and a red crash helmet taking interest in the search. A police constable on security duty was approached by a 17-year-old porter from Carlton Hayes Hospital. It is the same psychiatric hospital close to where both Lynda and Don's bodies were found. The porter told the constable that he saw Dawn walking on the day she disappeared. The constable arranged that they talk to him later to find out more information. Before they could talk to him again, valuable information was given to the incident room. The information came from the Porter friend, who also worked at the Carlton Hayes Hospital. This friend had been off duty that day, but he went to the hospital to collect his salary. He said Porter visited him at 10 p.m. and told him that Don's body had been found in a hedge near a gate by the M1 bridge. The friend's father overheard the conversation and asked the porter where he had gotten this kind of information, despite nothing about Don's case had been public. "Someone told me," the porter said, and he added that her body was hanging from a tree. Don's body wasn't hanging from a tree, but she was concealed beneath tree limbs and other debris. She was found inside an access gate leading from a 10-pound lane to the fields. It was just a 10-minute walk from the M1 bridge. How did the porter have all the information about where Don's body was more than 12 hours before police found her body? After investigators learned all of this information, they went to his house to arrest him. The porter is Richard Buckland. Buckland was then driven to Wigston Police Station so he could be interrogated further. Buckland was strange from the start. He gave inconsistent statements to investigators, but did admit that he saw Don on the day she disappeared, and that he did talk to her. At one point confessed to everything, and then quickly took it all back. During the third interview with him, Buckland gave a detailed confession. He was able to give so many facts about the crime scene that were not public at the time. Before Richard Buckland went on trial, Don Ashworth was buried in a little cemetery behind St. John Baptist Church in Enderby. She was described as a bright, lively, charming young lady and full of the joy of life. More than 200 people showed up at the cemetery to bid farewell to Don. Investigators were still building up their case against Richard Buckland and heard about something called DNA testing. They were already convinced that he took Don's life and Lynda Mann's as well, but they figured they could try this new technology. All the DNA evidence from both crime scenes was sent to a young geneticist. He worked at Leicestershire University and claimed to have come up with a new discovery called genetic fingerprinting. The geneticist was Dr. Alec Jeffrey. Dr. Jeffries was not sure how he could do what investigators wanted him to do. This sort of analysis had never been done before for a criminal case. Dr. Jeffries just used his technique to resolve an immigration case, and after that, a paternity dispute. This would be the first time that this new technology would be used in a criminal case to reveal the identity of a perpetrator. To everyone's shock, when the DNA tests came back, it showed that Buckland was innocent and did not take Lynda's life. Even more shocking, he did not take Don's life either. Dr. Jeffrey's tests, however, were able to determine that the police did at least get one thing right. That one man is responsible for both crimes. Richard Buckland was then released and became the first person to be exonerated through the use of DNA profiling. But how did he know so much about the crime scene? I will answer that later on. Inspector Derek Pierce then took charge of the investigation. Pierce read 1,800 messages that came from the public. One of the messages pointed to a man whose name had popped up on the Lynda Mann case, and because he had a prior record for flashing. Of course, hundreds of names had been called in anonymously by wives, lovers, rivals, and angry neighbours, and many of those names belonged to people with prior indecency arrests. This one wasn't worth special attention at the time, because in the earlier inquiry, he had been shown not to have moved to the village until 1 month after Lynda's murder. The message about him that the police received read, "You ought to have a look at a man named Colin Pitchfork." Investigators came up with a new idea. They started to see what DNA could do and decided that every alibied male resident in the villages between the ages of 17 and 34 years old would be asked to submit DNA samples voluntarily. It was announced to the public on the 2nd of January 1987. Derek Pierce didn't believe the killer was going to simply volunteer. The forensic laboratory was overwhelmed, and it seemed that the testing was going to take longer than the early estimation of 2 months. By May, 3,653 men had taken the tests, yet only 2,000 had been eliminated. Then, on September 18th, 1987, the police received a call. A woman called and said she heard a concerning conversation take place between a group of lads in the Clarendon pub in Leicester. One of the men, Ian Kelly, talked out loud about how he took the blood test on behalf of a friend named Colin Pitchfork. Investigators looked into the Pitchfork file and saw his history of flashing women. They also saw that his signature from when they did house calls did not match the signature that he made or gave on the day he supposedly took the blood test. He was married to Carol Pitchfork, he worked at a bakery, and Pitchfork was known as a womanizer and had a string of affairs. On September 19, 1987, Derek Pierce went to Ian Kelly's house to ask him some questions. Ian was also a baker, and he worked with Colin Pitchfork, at first denied taking Pitchfork's blood test, but then admitted it told Pierce what Pitchfork had told him. Pitchfork said that he was worried the police would assume he was responsible for what happened to Lynda and Don, based on his history of flashing. Pitchfork was a master manipulator and convinced Ian to go to the incident room and take the blood test on his behalf. Later that day, a group of investigators went to Pitchfork's house, and Detective Mick Thomas told him right away, "From inquiries that we have made, we believe you're responsible for taking Don Ashworth's life on the 31st of July, 1986. We believe another man gave a blood sample for you. I am arresting you. Do you understand?" Colin Pitchfork didn't deny it. His face said it all. He knew he had been caught red-handed. When Carol Pitchfork entered the room, it was explained to her what was going on. She immediately started kicking and punching her husband. Understandably, investigators were not eager to stop her. Pitchfork confessed what he did to Lynda Mann. He said that he planned on flashing her, but it turned into more when he realized she would recognize him one day, after he committed the crime. Pitchfork went back to his car, where his and Carol's baby was tied up in his seat, and went home. Pitchfork then told the police what he did to Don Ashworth. Both crimes happened the same way. He told investigators that he knew what he was doing, but could not stop himself from doing those things. Pitchfork also said that he tried to take his friend Ian Kelly's life a few times, to make sure he would never talk, but his plans always failed. On January 22, 1988, the 28-year-old Colin Pitchfork went on trial at the Crown Court in Leicester. Firstly, Ian Kelly was given an 18-month prison sentence suspended for 2 years, which meant he would not have to serve time. When Ian stepped out of the courtroom, he said, "I was wrong for doing what I did. I am sorry for whoever I caused the grievance to." Colin Pitchfork pleaded guilty to taking the lives of both Lynda Mann and Don Ashworth. He received a double life sentence for his crimes. Much to the shock of investigators and the families, the judge did not recommend a minimum term, which meant that Colin Pitchfork could conceivably be released in 10 or 12 years. The police were outraged. Lynda's stepfather, Eddie Eastwood, said Pitchfork looked at me eye to eye. He just stared at me as if to say, "Well, what's the matter with you?" I could not make him out. He looked almost human. Lynda's mother, Kathleen, said, "I did not look up when the lawyer passed those photos of Lynda to the bench. Those photos of how she looked when they found her. The cover dropped open, and the audience gasped when they saw the photos. My brother saw them and cried. Luckily, I did not look up. He must never be allowed to walk the streets again. He should hang with this new DNA genetic fingerprint. There is no chance of a person being later proven innocent after he has been hanged. There is no excuse anymore." When all the dust settled, investigators still faced the question of why Richard Buckland knew so many details of the crime scene of Don Ashworth. They believe that he stumbled upon her body on his way to work. He has often been described as the village idiot, and it is believed that played a part in why he confessed. The cases of Lynda Mann and Don Ashworth are seen as a big reason why DNA technology has advanced so much. Today, thousands of cold cases have been solved thanks to Dr. Alec Jeffries. Colin Pitchfork. He was released in September 2021. He was recalled to prison 2 months later after approaching young women in the street. Pitchfork was granted parole in June. The parole board said he should not have been recalled to prison in 2021 and found it was no longer necessary for the protection of the public for Mr. Pitchfork to remain confined. Lord Chancellor and Justice Secretary Alex Chalk asked the parole board to reconsider whether that decision was right. His intervention came after the Conservative MP for South Leicestershire Alberto Costa called for the decision to be challenged. Mr. Chalk's application was granted, with the judge finding irrationality in the decision to release Pitchfork. A fresh parole board hearing to decide whether he can be released will now take place at a date to be fixed.